So far in our first two segments, we've talked about brothers in arms and a description of Washington describing Arnold as a no more active, sensible officer in the whole of the Army. And now we're going to switch to the subject I think most people are familiar with, and that is the enemies in arms, because the two of them will become great enemies before it's all said and done. In 1778, when Washington restored Arnold's seniority, to try to end that problem, he talked about giving Arnold justice, and that's Washington's term, and about restoring a violated right. Washington did everything he could to try to get Arnold out of the dumps, so to speak. The problem is that Arnold has been seriously wounded, and that he probably should have gone home. He probably should have dropped out of the war, arrested for a while, but he didn't, and I've never been able to quite understand. But in the middle of May of 1778, of all places, he shows up in Valley Forge, just as the Army is sort of wrapping up that horrible winter-spring. And Arnold will present himself to Washington. The Army will be cheering because Arnold at this point is a great hero. And Arnold will also do something all the officers were required to do, and that is to sign a loyalty oath to the Continental Congress. And that's, of course, one of the issues that will come up when he chooses to go back over to the British. Washington realizes, and he promised Arnold some sort of a field command, but they both realize he can hardly even ride on a horse. He has to move around in a horse and buggy and that sort of thing. And so what really is a disastrous appointment for Benedict Arnold, George Washington will name him the military governor of Philadelphia upon the evacuation of the British. British had captured Philadelphia in late September of 1777. They'll pull out in June of 1778, and trust me, it's pretty much all downhill for Benedict Arnold. It was sort of like entering a snake pit. He came in with specific orders, one of which was to maintain stability in the community, not to favor any side, and by that we can include loyalists as well as rebels. But there are others in Philadelphia like Joseph Reed, who is a leading revolutionary. At one time had served on Washington's staff. He is in the process of becoming more or less, it's called the presidency of Pennsylvania. It's not a very powerful office, but Reed really resents the notion of a military governor coming to Philadelphia because he and others of his following, they're radical revolutionaries, and they want to get even with those, what we would call fellow travelers, those who had cooperated with the British, those leaning loyalist in the community. In fact, they will see to the hanging of two Quakers before it's all said and done at this particular time. Arnold tries to stamp all of that down following orders. Furthermore, and that puts him in a position of opposition to Reed. And then furthermore, the other thing that he's required to do by his orders from Washington is to shut the city down, to look everywhere high and low for goods that can be turned over to the Army, because the Continental Army is always short of supplies. And so Arnold will do that. And then the question is, had Arnold, perhaps taking advantage of these circumstances, and there's a divided opinion on that, was he sort of buying or stealing goods for himself that he could profit from in the future? And if it's the case, it's a representation of his disillusionment. He came into the war as a wealthy man. At this point, he's lost a lot of his finances. He spent a lot of his own purse in supporting the cause, and I can't answer the question one way or the other. It's yet to be determined. I know what others have concluded because they look backward through treason, but I'm not sure about that point. But what I can tell you is Joseph Reed was sure about that point, and Joseph Reed and his friends went after Arnold. They ultimately charged him with 8 criminal activities, one letting a vessel that Arnold the Charming Nancy had invested in, a privateer, out of port when the port was closed, one using private wagons to move some goods that belonged to Arnold and others. But some of the charges were silly. It involved one of Arnold's aides had asked a sergeant in the Pennsylvania militia to go find someone to give Arnold a haircut. Now, that was a serious charge, obviously. This is the kind of thing, this is how petty it could get at particular times. But it just so happened that that sergeant's father was one of Reed's close associates, and they really set themselves out to get rid of Benedict Arnold. Then, in addition, you can pile on here and say Arnold had lost his wife back in 1775 around the time of the Ticonderoga campaign. And so he's looking for a new wife, and he'll fall in love, madly in love, with young Pecky Shippen. And the two of them will eventually get married in April of 1779. And this just drives the Reed radicals nuts, is the best way to put it. And so they will mount a campaign to get rid of Arnold, to destroy his reputation. And Arnold will take, as he would, because he's a confrontational guy. He isn't always that sensible officer that Washington talked about. He will take them on, and what this leads to is a court-martial that Arnold demands to have to clear his name, and then it's delayed and delayed and delayed. Arnold gets madder and madder and madder, and it's during that delay that he begins to have some touch or feeling through Joseph Stansbury, a local merchant, with the British. This is the beginning. Now, one of the things people don't often point out is the British were not winning the war. And one of the points of strategy was, let's pick off the most effective, if we can, of the American commanders, and Arnold is a natural target. So there's going to be several months of negotiation. Obviously, we can't go into it in a short segment. But ultimately, Arnold will be exonerated in the court-martial except for 2 points: the private wagons issue and letting the ship out of port, the Charming Nancy, and the leaders in Congress and those who are on the bench, the officers on the bench for Arnold's court-martial, will demand that Washington reprimand Arnold in public. So this is done in April of 1780, and you can see where I'm headed. I'm headed right into the treason story. Arnold is thoroughly insulted by this. Washington does it as gently as possible. Arnold is not called out. It just appears in the orders of the day. And Washington is almost apologetic to Arnold in other communications. And then he lets Arnold know, I think so highly of you, despite all of these problems, I want you to perhaps take charge of the left wing of the Continental Army. Very, very responsible position, on the assumption that Arnold could then again take a field command. But Arnold fairly begs for a different appointment, and that is one that would seemingly be tamer, that he could handle, and that is to become the head of American, all the fortresses and the redoubts and whatever else there were at West Point. So as we know, Arnold gets the appointment to West Point, and he begins then to negotiate with the British very seriously. Major Andre will come and visit him middle of September of 1780, and ultimately this whole plot will be uncovered. Arnold will flee down the river on September 25th of 1780 to a waiting British vessel. The name of the vessel, by the way, is the Vulture. Arnold will write a letter to Washington and say that basically people will not understand what I'm doing, but I believe in the bottom of my heart that I am doing the right thing. And by that he meant that what he was doing by, shall we say, dealing with the British, that he was saying that this cause, from his point of view, was lost. Leaders in Congress are no better than leaders in Parliament. That the cause itself, the people weren't supporting the Continental Army. He has a letter he writes to Nathaniel Greene, General Nathaniel Greene at this time, where he says, how can people let the army starve in a land of plenty? And there was lots of near starvation in the Continental Army. He simply has become so embittered that he decides the cause itself is lost. And so in his mind, if we look at it from that point of view, the cause has betrayed itself, and it has betrayed him because it has not lived up to his ideals. But we don't really look at it that way, do we? Because we're trained up in another tradition. Ultimately, the cause was very, very successful, and Arnold will come down to us as this rather notorious character. In fact, George Washington plays a very important part in the overall denigration of the reputation of Benedict Arnold. Because Washington, who was gravely upset and disappointed when he learned about what had happened when Arnold had gone back over, fled down the river, he's very, very upset. He'll snap out of it, and he will then say, we must destroy this man's reputation because we cannot allow others to follow him back into the British arms. And so Washington, without really having a modern publicist or anything like that, will begin to mount a campaign. to destroy the reputation of Benedict Arnold, even to the point where we really have forgotten all of Arnold's contributions to the cause. Now, I know there are lots of people who want to blame all of what happened on Peggy Shippen. She was implicated a little bit. I understand that. They want to blame it on, well, in the old days, they blame it on Satan himself, and there's all of this kind of commentary to try to explain what happened. But from Arnold's point of view, and this is hard for us to understand today, he thought he was doing the right thing, that he was actually saving the cause by betraying the cause. It's very, very ironic in the end. But Washington, who at one time was indeed his good comrade in arms, has now become his enemy, and he will do what is necessary to make the American people, shall we say, actually hate and resent, at the time, hate and resent Arnold. There'll be parades in Philadelphia. There'll be parades in other communities denouncing him. They strip his name from the Continental Congress, from the general officer rolls. And it goes on and on and on today. Even today, when you visit the Saratoga battlefield, you will find a monument to a boot. That is the boot that got shot up when Benedict Arnold entered that particular Hessian redoubt. And you won't find Arnold's name there at all. You won't find Arnold's name on the obelisk celebrating the great victory at Saratoga, the surrender field when Burgoyne surrendered his army. And you won't find Arnold associated, even though he really was critical to winning the battle that brought the French nation into the war on the behalf of the American rebels, recognizing their independence. And from that point in time, ironically for Benedict Arnold, who went back to the British, he actually helped put in place the very elements that would defeat the British nation and lead then to the American Republic, ironically, as an enemy of George Washington.